But let me make two generic observations, first of all, before I go to the specifics of your question. The very first one is that it's very good indeed that we have a president that follows things through as a promise of mandate from the campaign time to this point in time and going forward. And in her statement, one disturbing observation I personally made is that of acknowledging the adjustment or going down of Namibia from an upper middle income economy to a lower middle income country. For me, it really contradicts Namibia Vision 2030 of turning the country into an industrialized nation in the remaining 4 years of 2030 vision. So we can only get being industrialized from an upper middle income status than coming to industrialization from a lower middle income status. In other words, it's a capitulation of government in its battle to close the inequality gap in the country over the past 35 years of independence. And in any case, no country in this world has ever developed through aid or grants. It is not worth something really celebrating. Our failure in the redistribution of national resources lies deeply in our flawed policies of affirmative action and failure to democratize resource sharing in the country. And one such enabler, which is fishery, that go to politically connected people or well-placed individuals, it's really highly compromised, and such resources don't go to regional councils or municipalities or ministries that are actually mandated with the full national responsibility of building infrastructure. And that's why we end up even playing our national matches in neighboring countries like South Africa and others, because we don't direct those resources where they need to be directed, rather to individuals who are able to build roads, able to build schools or clinics and so on. So that's one general comment. And I think if we follow the same trend, we might actually still fail to fulfill one of the pillars or objective of the NDP6 that we are facing, which is closing down the gap of inequality in the country. And so we really need to be careful in approach. My second observation also is that we need to be very vigilant. There is an audacious threat that Namibia faces with bureaucratic bottlenecks. I mean, for example, the president spoke about the Katima Mulilo Grootfontein Railway project, which is now in a feasibility study phase. But we have heard about this project in the past 6 to 7 years in the previous administration. But to only talk of feasibility study at this stage, I think it's one of those challenges that we face with bureaucracy, because we are a bureaucratic development status or state or country. And so we really need to be careful. At times, one would recommend that we need to take drastic transformative approaches to our own development and flowing even through these things of tenders and stuff like that. So those are my general comments, and it's also based on the fact that the NDP implementation was extended, and mainly for reasons of 40% of its tenants not being fulfilled on time. So if we are not careful, we might even end up extending the tenants of NDP6. So these things need to be taken a bit. Okay, so coming down to your specific question on the tone of the president, obviously I think the president is really directed and structured in the SWAPO party manifesto for development, but also the president has a tone directed by issues of leadership and governance, in which she talks about the PAIMA, values of pragmatism, integrity, meritocracy and others, which actually are referring to her calls for unity of purpose, having one heart and one mind, because you can have a good policy, a good plan, but if you don't have the willingness of people to drive and execute that plan, nothing would happen. And these values are very critical. The other thing that drives the tone of the president, obviously, is the institutional reforms and innovations, where she has really put into action already a lean government that's very responsive and agile enough, especially when it comes to cost saving in terms of public operations. And I think one of the initiatives also in the last 100 days of the government is that of a design thinking that was put in place by the Prime Minister's office, which is a very good initiative in terms of breaking away from business and doing things differently out of the box, breaking the tradition. That's really something to celebrate. And the other tonnage issue in terms of the direction is the implementation of key policy priorities. He talked about 7 priorities and 8 economic enablers, and we can talk about that at another time. So these things are really guiding the president in terms of focusing on a campaign promise, the party manifesto, as well as the NDP plan of action.
Mm-hmm. So the president, having launched the 6th National Development Plan as a blueprint for the 8th administration, which early policy decisions or interventions best demonstrate her priorities for inclusive growth and transformation?
Look, I think in the very first place, the NDP6 itself is not just a blueprint document. I think it's a national consensus consultative process with ambitious goals, which really involves our local community at different levels across the country, the broad and depth of the country, and that is really building an agenda that's acceptable and creating a sense of ownership by the society at large, and that in itself actually guarantees the potential and future sustainability of the plan's implementation and its success possibilities. Secondly, I think the plan also itself do have a specific focus. It's not just a plan without handles and organs that we can hold on. It focuses on things like the economic growth and transformation and resilience, which is one pillar. The other pillar being that of really focusing on human development and community resilience. We have seen government commitment in terms of its budget and also in terms of policy, how tertiary education has really been put on a higher priority for free education come next year. It also has a specific focus on environmental sustainability, although personally I'm not such a good fan of the environmentalism agenda because it has some inherently inhibitive implications. But we also need to look after our own environment. It also has a specific focus on effective governance, which is a continuity element from the previous dispensation as well. And that's something that we need to enshrine all the time in all our NDPs going into the future.
Well, what does it mean symbolically and practically for Namibia to have its first female head of state? And in what ways has this milestone influenced the national discourse on gender, on leadership, as well as on equity?
This is our new normal. We almost don't see it as an issue anymore. But we can say that there is nothing really unusual about having a female president any longer. We've seen it coming for years. We have had our ZIP culture practice for some time now, really, in most of our public institutions. And this is going to be a normal way of life in Namibia. But one thing one needs to caution also is that have to be careful not to overly play the female empowerment game as we face the agony of the boy child in Namibia, who has now become, one of our public headaches. when you look at institutions of education, the concentration between boys and girls is almost 70-30%. That could potentially also translate to employment opportunities, ownership of assets and access to resource opportunities, and so we need to place it fairly well without digging a hand-bomb for ourselves.
Now, from agriculture to education, land reform to housing, we've seen significant momentum. Has there been any notable shifts in governance or in policy emphasis compared to previous administrations?
Yes and no. Maybe point out two things here. On the yes side, I would say on the education, yes. We are now looking at finishing higher education reforms and financing. That's really revolutionary and transformative in a way. We are also looking at the recognition of creative industry as one of the professional occupations for which most of our practitioners have not been recognized a large part of our history. And that's something really commendable and a great out of the North. Maybe on the North side, I think that keeps us perhaps in bondage. On the land, pricing of land in Namibia, for me, really remains relatively unaffordable. And on the digital space or digital divide, when one looks at issues of fintech, the financial inclusion drive and agenda or space, Namibia has either no policies in place for some of these things, or the existing limited regulatory environment remains prohibitive to innovation, especially for young people that are looking at online jobs and online employability. Some of these things are not so welcomed, or there are no regulations to really empower our youth and, in a digital virtual economy. Especially when one talks of digital currency trading platforms, people are being prohibited from doing such things, but yet these are opportunities where young people can really be educated, make some income, online employability and job opportunities. And unless we revisit some of the Bank of Namibia policies to really reflect strategically and more promotionally, I think young people will remain denied of some of the opportunities because everything is going digital.
Now, I know that you earlier on commented on the president acknowledging the country's reclassification to lower middle income status and as an opportunity for better financing. But what do you think are some of the new strategies for investment and economic diversification that are emerging?
We do have, I suppose, some of those strategies in place, especially when one looks at the green hydrogen agenda that we are driving as a country. Although when it comes to investment and participation in the energy sector, the policies in Namibia are very encouraging in terms of promoting private and public participation in power generation, for example. But yet, when it comes to the practicality of enforcement, private people are very limited. And as a result, rural areas are deprived of the necessary investment in that space of renewable energy generation by individuals and communities out there, because maybe we don't have aggressive investment drive schemes that promote these things. And that call goes also to financial institutions as well. Why don't they actually step into the space of promoting financing of such initiatives in rural areas. And maybe because of the rural areas being rural areas, so that these things are not happening. But unless we probably take transformative, drastic, revolutionary approach in that regard, we might actually remain only entertained at the policy space, but implementation might remain something wanting to be seen. Yes. And that goes for many other aspects of our economy. The other upcoming on the horizon sort of opportunities for investment is in the area of oil and gas. I think where upstream investments and downstream participation of the local communities in that industry really needs to be encouraged. One has to jump up investment. We have to build pipelines of moving oil from Namibia to Zambia, or moving oil from Namibia to Botswana, either with the rail, other things, and pipelines. I think SMEs need to be financed, empowered, and coached and mentored to really become active participants in those horizons that are low-hanging opportunities for us. Given that Namibia is wanting to become classified as a low-middle income country.
So youth empowerment has featured prominently with a capitalized National Youth Fund, apprenticeship schemes and MSME support. What kind of long-term impact would you say could these initiatives have on employment as well as on entrepreneurship?
Far-reaching, to be honest. I think nobody can really stand in the way of investment in those aspects of MSMEs and youth empowerment or youth enterprises. I think the more we invest, the more we are banking on generational transformation of the economy in the country at large. And so I think we really need to pump as much money as possible into those spaces of enterprises and SMEs. But it is one thing to put money into those areas. The one thing that we know for sure historically is that young enterprises have a failure rate that is naturally very high because of inexperience and many other factors of probably not even getting financing because of people being young. If they are young, they don't have collaterals and other things. And therefore, the few that get these opportunities of financing really need not just financing. They need far much beyond financing. They need coaching. They need mentorship. They need to be handheld. And probably even the financial institution, maybe they need to take a halal approach to their financing practice and culture, where they take equity ownership of some of these enterprises to ensure that at least for the first 10 years, they have that equitable ownership with the interest of growing that kind of business and moving it from the stage of SME to become a large company enterprise that employs thousands of people. And then at that point, they can probably decouple with the institutions or enterprises and let them fly. We don't have this kind of practices in Namibia. And these are some of the things maybe we can have as a public discourse to ensure that there's a cultural transformation to financing, there's a cultural transformation to nurturing of our SMEs in the country by the various stakeholders that are involved in the gameplay.
What expectations should Namibia then, or should Namibians have for the next phase of her presidency, and what would success look like in 5 years from now, perhaps?
Well, look, I think it's really good that we have a president committed to follow things through, as I said earlier, and that is the promise of the electoral campaign, that we need to put in action in order to win the public confidence going forward. However, we must be vigilant not to be trapped in bureaucratic bottlenecks of implementing our development agenda, being trapped in corporate capture that comes with a high cost, especially where most of the public infrastructure go through tendering process, prices are inflated and so forth. We also don't have to lay trap to rhetorics of international acceptability such as environmental agenda, at times that mean nothing to us, and where we put so much money. And when you look at Europe today, they are running out of energy because they have adopted the green agenda, which does not fund any single industry. But when you look at the brown energy or fuel, fossil fuel resources, they do finance development, they do catapult development to a level where we can become a developed economy. So we really need to play a good balance of that green agenda kind of thing. So